So two of 20th Century Fox's most popular franchises come together in a mashup born out of the comics, which ultimately provided very disappointing results up on the theatrical screen. But let's delve deep in these two warring creations for Alien versus Predator. When a Weyland Industries satellite detects a heat signature emanating below the surface of Antarctica, a team of experts are assembled at the behest of an alien Charles Bishop Weyland, who wants to claim the discovery for his own legacy. Weyland's right-hand man, Maxwell Stafford, recruits expert mountaineer Lex Woods, who is needed to guide the team beneath the Arctic surface. However, when Lex objects to the short window of time given to train the team for this expedition, Italian archaeologist Sebastian and other teammates renew her confidence, believing they are in better hands with her on board than with anyone else. Meanwhile, an advanced alien ship approaches Earth and disembarks 3 young warriors to the Antarctic to fulfill a rite of passage. As the Weyland team discovers a laser precision tunnel drilled into the ice that wasn't there the day before, their curiosity is heightened. Yet as they descend towards Weyland's prized discovery, the few left on the surface are viciously wiped out by the predators. The expedition within the pyramid ultimately reveals hieroglyphics, telling of a sacrificial chamber, and a testing ground for a chosen few. Yet when the team accidentally unlocks a chest of alien weaponry, Lex strongly suggests they stop for the day, due to Weyland's struggling health. However, the removal of the weapons ultimately begins a time transformation to the entire structure, blowing off parts of the team from one another. A set of alien eggs birthed from a resuscitated alien queen unleashed facehuggers onto unwilling subjects, which soon gestated to full chestbursters. Eventually, full-fledged xenomorphs are set loose upon humans and predators alike, and 2/3 of the young hunting party are quickly killed by them, with one left to fend for itself without its plasma cannon. As Weyland's team is rapidly snuffed out, Charles Weyland himself is slain by a predator in an attempt to escape with Lex and Sebastian. With danger escalating as the pyramid continues to shift its configuration, Sebastian is taken by one of the aliens, and Lex encounters a predator, whom she hands the cannon over to, with trepidation. Facing down against the xenomorph hordes along with the unshackled queen, which was set free through the grisly use of the species' own acidic blood, Lex and the predator must survive together in this brutal trial by fire in the Arctic wasteland. So Alien vs. Predator saw its theatrical release in August of 2004 and won garnered over $177 million at the box office of a reported budget between $60 to $70 million. Pretty much wasn't critically well received. A lot of things were levied against it between critics and fans alike. That was very much a thin script, a very PG-13 bloodless action off of 2 franchises that were very much violent, graphic, hard R-rated films. And plus you factor in the major build-up to the entire thing that was going over for so many years now, where in Predator 2 you had the xenomorph skull appearing in the Predator trophy room as seen by Danny Glover's Mike Harrigan. Then there are all the video games that came up over different platforms over the years. It really kind of starts out back in the late 1980s where you had Dark Horse Comics who picked up the licenses from 20th Century Fox after the respective films from James Cameron and John McTiernan in both franchises became major successes. They very much started to develop things as separate comic book series, but they were kind of like at a point in time where they're kind of like negotiating things like DC Comics to do some kind of crossover at a certain point in time. And they eventually did stuff with like Superman, Batman, a couple other characters. But very much was this thing like, okay, we got these 2 franchises that are very much from the same licensor. Why don't we just kind of wrap them together in the entire story and put them out as our own sort of in-house crossover type of thing? So the Alien vs. Predator series was born about 1989, and very much a lot of the story here for the movie is actually adapted from pretty much that first story arc, despite the fact that the time period has changed. It actually is in the future here where there's this infestation of xenomorphs that get into this human colony, and this band of predators kind of land on the planet and stuff like that. But the younger ones kind of go off a little bit off the handle, and they kind of start slaughtering everyone. But the sort of the elder predator kind of ends up teaming up with one of the main characters in the entire storyline, Machiko, and they kind of have this bond or whatnot that builds up the whole thing. They kind of team up to a certain degree. So lot of the elements from it are kind of adapted into this thing, but obviously the weird type of thing is that producer John Davis, who was kind of involved, I think, more in the Predator franchise beforehand with Joel Silver, but Silver's not involved with this thing, even though some of the Alien producers get credit here. I don't think they're very much mainly involved. They're just kind of like involved because they retained some rights to the entire Alien franchise. It's like, okay, I kind of like the ideas of the whole thing, but I don't want to set it in the future. I want to set it on Earth in the present day and stuff like that, because I just want to do something different than what they did. So it's like, that was kind of the big, that's always been the big sort of like crux of the whole thing that people have been very much critical about. It's like, why would you set it in modern day when like the Alien franchise is set much further in the future, and you're kind of having much more like the gradual discovery of the xenomorph race and stuff like that? Why would you set it in present day Earth and stuff like that? Because comics creators are like, well, it doesn't make sense to set the alien creatures here in modern day Earth or whatnot. So I don't know why Don Davis was so hung up on, like, it's got to be present day and stuff like that. Why wouldn't you go forward, maybe deal with colonial marines or something else like that, have it more set in that futuristic environment? You could probably do a little bit more science fiction-y type of things that wouldn't be so betraying of mythologies in that regard with the Alien franchise, but it gets all complicated later on when we get all the stuff Ridley Scott does with his Alien prequels, stuff like that. It's complicated. But when you're getting up this whole thing, it ends up being who's going to direct the entire film. There are a lot of names kind of rumored here and there, and there are other people who actually developed other scripts, like Peter Briggs, who would end up writing the Hellboy film for Guillermo del Toro at this point in time. He actually wrote a screenplay that got fairly good reactions from people back in the early 90s, but this was at the same time 20th Century Fox was kind of wrapped up in a lot of fucking development hell and production hell on Alien 3, and Predator 2 had just not quite performed quite so well at the box office, so they really just kind of cooled off the entire idea there, and they didn't go for it on that. But the people like Brett Leonard, who did stuff like Virtuosity and Lawnmower Man, and Leonard did the worst Highlander film ever created, Highlander the Source. Horrible movie, one of the worst things I've ever seen in my life. Got like David Twohy, who had previously been involved with the development on Alien 3, and also co-wrote like The Fugitive. He did Pitch Black. He had Roland Emmerich, who had just been off the success of like Independence Day and Godzilla, stuff like that. You had Chuck Russell, who had done Eraser and The Blob and Dream Warriors. You had Guillermo del Toro, rumored to be involved with it, but then, of course, goes off into Hellboy at the same point in time. And even got like Joe Johnston, who had done The Rocketeer and Jurassic Park 3, and later do Captain America the First Avenger. But obviously they landed on Paul W.S. Anderson, who had been having a bit of an odd track record at this point in time. He did Mortal Kombat, which was very well-received video game film, despite some of the very dated CGI and the whole thing. People still very much look at it very well. Did Event Horizon, which has still maintained a very strong cult following despite the hindrance from the studio at the time. Then he goes off into Soldier, to start doing the Resident Evil stuff, which has not been gotten the greatest reputation over time. So it's been, at the point in time, it's like, oh, maybe he's not quite as good as we hoped he was probably going to be as a kind of big summer action movie blockbuster director in a certain way. But he had very much a strong reverence for all the Alien stuff, the Predator stuff, very much took inspiration again from the comics, because he'd been developing the thing for at least 10 years or so at this point in time. He had an idea way back before he ever did his first feature film. And so it's like, once he eventually gets up on the entire thing and actually gets in front of the studio's executives with a bunch of concept art that he commissioned to kind of sell the idea to them, he very much got hinged on the whole thing. And he's the only one who gets the actual screenplay credit in this whole thing, but apparently it was Shane Salerno kind of being most involved with it, with rewrites and stuff like that, going up through production and stuff like that when they're actually filming the entire thing. So he got full credit on the sequel, Aliens vs. Predator Requiem, so say what you want about that. We'll get to that in due time. But the whole thing is like, okay, you get this whole thing, is like, even though like people might think Anderson's quite as exciting of a director as they probably hope for, it's like, okay, he's not a James Cameron, he's not a John McTiernan, he's not a Ridley Scott or anything like that. But let's see what he can deliver. Let's see what we can go with, because they're promoting it very well. The entire thing started pre-production in summer of 2003. And he started shooting in October of 2003. And kind of a nice, perfect synergy in this whole thing, because on Halloween that year, they released theatrically the director's cut of Alien to promote the eventual Alien Quadrilogy DVD set. And they put out a teaser trailer promoting that AVP was coming, and put some featurettes and stuff like that. So they were very much perfectly tying everything in as a perfect marketing machine going up to the whole thing. So smart things they were doing in this whole thing. They're getting all the teasers out at the right point in time, get Alien back into theaters, promote that big DVD box. It was a phenomenal DVD box set. So everything's coming off in just the right ways, going up the entire thing. But again, there's certain detriments, there's certain qualities about the film that just don't live up to what it could have been. It lives up to the mythology of what you had before, all the qualities, the legacies of the quality of the films you got from those other directors. Even some of the lesser ones like Predator 2, maybe not quite as well received, but it has a lot of things going for it that has a very over-the-top comic book style. It's very violent and gory and stuff like that. If you're very much up on the bloodlust, a lot more stylized action, that's very much got it for you. Alien Resurrection is not terribly well received by most people, but it's got a very broad action movie sensibility about that. It's very big, a lot of things going on with a lot of concept that a lot of people probably don't care for, but it certainly has a slot in there for certain sections of the audience and the crowds and whatnot who care about the franchise. Stuff like that. So there's all things all over the place where you could get into the lesser end things, you get into the much higher end things, and people kind of hold things up to the higher end stuff with Ridley Scott and John McTiernan and James Cameron and stuff like that. And you want to get something that's up to that quality, and it really didn't deliver that. It really just came off as a sort of like one because they actually shot for PG-13 and 7R. A lot of people are very much, again, criticizing the fact that it was very bloodless. It didn't have as much graphicness to the entire film. The action was very much tamed down. And so when they eventually did an unrated cut on DVD and Blu-ray, a lot of the blood, pretty much all the blood is put in digitally in post-production. It's all digital add-ins and stuff like that that look kind of low grade to a certain degree. If they did them practically on set, they'd look a lot better. When you're trying to add them into moments or whatnot where they weren't designed to be, it kind of shows its hand to be not quite good. And they ended up setting up production over in Prague in the Czech Republic where they could have their money go much, much further than it would like in Los Angeles where a lot of the sets would have cost them maybe $20 million to produce. Over the Czech Republic, it cost you about $2 million because it's a much higher transfer rate for the good economy at that point in time. So they could actually construct a lot more practical sets and not have everyone on green screen so often. So they had a very good thing with the production design of the entire film. Look at Mortal Kombat, look at Event Horizon. They are very well-designed films. Paul W.S. Anderson does bring forth a lot of sense of culture to these different aspects of these different films. That really just builds out the entire sensibility of just having a much more texture type of world for the characters to inhabit. So it's a very good type of thing where, he, again, like I said, he presented a lot of concept art that he commissioned to kind of sell the entire concept he had for the entire film. So he had very much a strong vision in mind going forward of how the film should look. Even though David Johnson's cinematography is very well shot, I feel like some of the lighting and a lot of the color schemes involved are very much kind of bland to a certain degree. There's very much a muted tone to the entire film that doesn't get off the strongest qualities overall. It's really kind of fell off to a certain degree in that regard. The certain masters we have now for DVD and Blu-ray aren't the strongest possible, so maybe if it ever got a 4K remaster, maybe things would look a little stronger here and there with colors and shadows, stuff like that. But right now, it looks a little flat to a certain degree, doesn't inspire as well. But it all very much is, in terms of the camera work and the framing compositions and stuff like that, comes off very much expertly in that regard. But I do feel like, at least in the first half of the entire film, we're kind of building everything up and getting all the players and the pieces in the right places to kind of move the thing forward to where you can actually get the action going. I think it's pretty respectfully handled. It's not anything too egregious, even though, yeah, there's underdeveloped characters. There's things that are kind of landing a little bit flat for a lot of things here and there, but there's at least a couple of actors in key roles that really do prop things up to a certain degree in this whole thing that I think are just very solid actors who are maybe not given as much as they could, but they make the most out of what they have here. In terms of Sanaa Lathan portraying the character of Lex Wood, who has a very strong sense of agency here, built out of her sharp intellect and very respected leadership skills that I like this entire relationship she has with Charles Bishop Weyland, portrayed by Lance Henriksen here, where she kind of bows out early on the whole thing, saying you're not giving enough time to train these people to do this stuff properly. It's being a lot more dangerous going in this thing the way you want to do it. You kind of we contacted this other guy. He doesn't have as much experience. We're not being good as hands with him, but we'll have to make do with it and stuff like that. And kind of appealing to her principles. Stuff like that. It's okay, she kind of bends and stuff like that. It's okay, everyone else kind of throws that vote of confidence in her. It's we feel better if you're involved with this whole thing, leading the entire expedition, stuff like that. So it kind of gets that sort of quality going on with those two characters here, where he kind of defaults to her. When they're all the way down the pyramid, they kind of have these revelations. She says, well, I think it's time to call it a day, go back to the camp, stuff like that. He kind of gives her that sort of authority in that thing. He kind of defaults to her. Okay, we'll put everything else on pause. We're going to follow your lead, though he's ailing and stuff like that, and he kind of is very eager to get this start discovery and whatnot, she kind of talks some sense, like, hey, you've claimed it. It's yours. No one else is coming down here and kind of steal it away from you guys. This is your find. So it's like, I like that fact that she kind of has that perception, the sort of very clear-cut sort of way where she's not getting overly ambitious. She can be objective to the entire situation. But I also like the fact that she does emote very well on screen. There's certain moments of sympathy you really get from her character here, where you get this moment later on where, like, her and the character of Sebastian, portrayed by Raoul Bova, they're kind of trapped in this sort of morphing pyramid type of thing, and she's starting to put the pieces together. The inmates are loose in the prison. The guards, we've taken their guns away, so we need to kind of like restore the natural order of things. But she still has a fear there. There's still a trepidation, like, this is not going to save us all the way, but it might give us a better chance of survival if we give the guns back to these guys and restore sort of a natural order of how things are supposed to go down when we're just kind of trapped in the middle of this entire war here. So I like the fact that she does have those moments where you can just feel a little something extra for the character, of course, when she goes up to the Predator and starts doing the whole thing like, the enemy of my enemy is my friend and stuff like that. She's very much scared in the entire thing. And just the fact that she does have those moments where she can kind of get up over the top of the fear, kind of transcend it a little bit, show the courage in the moment and stuff like that. But I do feel like there's a little bit of a fall off to a certain range. She doesn't get, in terms of the character, how it's written, how the entire thing is structured and executed in that regard, doesn't really feel like she goes to a war to a certain degree to kind of earn her stripes as a warrior so much. She just kind of survived the situation to a certain degree, and that kind of is enough to a certain degree in terms of what the story is trying to tell you. But for the audience, I don't feel like there's enough of a thing where she goes to hell. She goes to harrowing scenarios like you've had in other situations throughout the rest of these franchises to really feel like it's as earned as possible as a warrior, a soldier, a survivor in that regard, where you've been through these terrible scenarios. It feels a little light in that regard. So I don't feel like when you get up to that third act and you get this sort of team up between her and the Predator, it doesn't feel quite as earned because they haven't gone through quite as much with the character to feel like that stuff has built up to such a great degree that it feels like you're seeing a warrior and another warrior bonding over certain things that kind of team up against an enemy. It feels a little less than deserved overall. So it's something that definitely affects things going on throughout the rest of the film. But like I said, Lance Henriksen, such a great actor. And of course, Paul W.S. Anderson wanted to have a casting link back to one of the previous franchises here. And of course, Lance, a really good actor to get in this whole thing, as the founder of Weyland Industries here would be one half of Weyland-Yutani in the future of the Alien franchise, of course. Him previously being the android of Bishop, and of course the Bishop 2, which was supposed to be not an android in Alien 3, but actually an organic human, like, designer out of the androids and whatnot, which kind of smudges this whole thing around in terms of, like, Charles Bishop Weyland being the guy that the androids would be modeled after here and there and everywhere. But of course, continuity's all up in the weird places and whatnot, following Ridley Scott getting his prequels off the ground and stuff like that. But Lance does a really good job. I think it brings a really strong sensibility of resonance to his performance here. He has a great grounded sensibility of what he brings to the screen here. A lot of good weight to it as well. It's like, even though there's not as much substance to the character, it's like you get the good setup here, like he's ailing and he wants to have that one big final discovery that he'd be remembered for the rest of time and whatnot, going on this expedition to find the whole thing under the ice and whatnot. But it doesn't feel like you get as much dug deep into the deep core about the character and his history, his legacy, stuff like that, why this feels so necessary, what he's done in his life that hasn't amounted as much as it possibly could, and maybe get into some other things here and there or whatnot. Just feel like you got a good setup of a character here, but you don't go quite as deep or as far as you could to really explore it as much as you can. But I think Lance does a really good job this whole thing. Gets a pretty nice death scene, of course, because everything gets a little tamed down. They're doing PG-13, even the unrated cut. There's no additional footage to cut to, so it's good setup, good type of things. I just feel like it could have been more overall to have a much bigger payoff to the entire character here, but a nice death scene and stuff like that. So it's a good addition to the film that adds something extra for the fans, and adds something extra because he's such a good actor as well. But another good actor is Colin Salmon. I've talked about him previously. He was in the last 3 Pierce Brosnan James Bond films. Did a really solid job in that regard. He was in Punisher Warzone. He was in Resident Evil for Paul W.S. Anderson before this. And I always just really like what he brings to the screen. He's got this very strong, charismatic screen presence. Like the character of Maxwell Stafford here, he just brings this confident, authoritative quality to the whole thing. It's like everything he brings forward in every single scene has a compelling gravitas to what he's doing and everything. It's like, he doesn't have to do much, but he has that, the way he carries himself, the way he projects himself, the way he delivers the lines. Everything has an attitude, a personality to it. Everything has just a little quality to it that brings the character forward and engages the audience what he does. And of course, he has a sharp decisiveness and various other qualities here that just makes him a really nice, action-ready character. It's like he's got a formidable physicality by himself, and when he switches over and pulls out the guns and whatnot, you're very convinced this guy can handle himself and get up into certain situations, even though it doesn't last nearly as long as you'd like to, but he has a very nice death scene in that regard with the entire net closing in on him and stuff like that. Really good addition to the cast. I think he's a really, really solid actor. Great type of things from him. Raoul Bova, again, portraying Sebastian. He's another guy who's like, he's very good at doing what he needs to do in the film. He brings forth all the essential mythology you need in the character to weave all the stuff in the story around, but he doesn't have much else to do in that regard. It's like he's just kind of there to kind of translate all the hieroglyphs and all that type of stuff and kind of weave together the mythologies and stuff like that. And other than that, he doesn't have much of a character to speak of. He's got good chemistry with Sanaa and Lathan, but there's nothing really else to talk about the character. There's nothing really else there as a substance to him. So that's really the failing of a lot of the supporting cast. The whole thing is like, it's not like the fact that they're not good actors. They're just not really given much of anything. And the few of them that are giving some stuff here and there, I don't find all that compelling. They're just kind of flaky characters to a certain degree. They're very disposable, non-memorable characters in the whole thing that really just makes the entire experience just feel like a lightweight slasher film that doesn't have the gore to back it up in a certain way. A fine cast and a lot of the key roles, but a lot of the other things just fall off because they're just not written very interestingly or very much with a lot of dimension overall. So that's very much a screenplay falter type of thing, and then the supporting cast doesn't bring a whole lot extra to the entire thing to really elevate things beyond the lightweight qualities they're given in the screenplay. But moving on to the entire film's score here from composer Harold Klosser, who would end up being a regular composer for Roland Emmerich later in the years, was kind of a nice score to a certain degree. It's like you're not completely using like the same themes from like Goldsmith and Horner and Silvestri, stuff like that, but he does a really solid job kind of mixing in the same feelings overall. Kind of homaging things to a tad, but it's still kind of capturing the sensibilities of what those composers did for those individual franchises and try to weave them together like horror cues kind of mixed in with a little bit of the Silvestri military march here and there. It's like he does a really respectable job. I think Brian Tyler, who did the score for the following AVP film, did a much stronger job to homage like Goldsmith and Horner and maybe a little bit of Silvestri here and there. I think he did a much more direct job sort of taking those themes and kind of integrating them into the scores. But I think Klosser still did a very nice job here to put together very solid work here in this regard here. But when we get into talking about the action in Alien vs. Predator, it's like everything's very well done. Very good precision qualities in terms of the cinematography, the editing, all the slick things going on in that regard. But nothing really stands out so much as like a very iconic, memorable sequence. Like everything just services the plot very well, moves the story forward, but the thing comes out as like, that was a really excellent sequence. That's really iconic for this film that people kind of talk about throughout the years and stuff like that. So think back like Aliens and Predator, and even Predator 2 is like there's very distinguished sequences. Even Alien 3 has very distinctive styles to what it wants to do, and it just nails some very interesting qualities in its sequences to make sure there's suspense, there's terror, there's action going on, there's certain intensity to everything. This one doesn't quite nail anything that is too distinctive for its own sake and sensibilities here. So, though everything is well done, you don't really get that sensibility that everything is like hitting off on the top cylinders that makes it as very much a strong, iconic impression upon itself. But something that does aid the action very well is that the fact that Anderson really was focused on doing as many things practically as possible. Kind of not use CGI unless we actually have to do it. So he employed some very good people in terms of visual supervisor John Bruno, who's like along those lines so much. He really didn't want to do visual effects if he didn't have to. Really favor like miniatures and models and various other tricks to get the job done. And so everything comes off very well in terms of like making everything as much in camera as possible. But the CGI, where you got companies like CineSight and Double Negative, and a couple other ones that didn't quite get credit in the entire film, it's a little bit of a mixed bag in that regards, because there's certain sequences that look very, very good, very well rendered, but there's some other ones that look a little undercooked to a certain degree. Certain things are not quite as convincing on screen as possible, and especially, well, like I said, when they're trying to do the unrated version, trying to add in all the digital blood, a lot of it doesn't look very good. It's not rendered very well because it's all being done kind of haphazardly after the fact. We really didn't plan it in advance. So, like, there's certain things in the film, like, a lot of the aliens do look good in terms of having them rendered in CGI or whatnot, but they still even use a lot of people in suits, such as Tom Woodruff Jr., who is very much accustomed to at this point in time, doing it for Alien 3 and Alien Resurrection, because Studio 80i did all the practical effects for the aliens in those films. And they even had an animatronic version of one of the xenomorphs just to have much more of a higher articulation to a certain degree. Do something the guy in the suit couldn't quite do and have much more of a hydraulic way to kind of like get the inner mouth kind of jutting out and various other things. Just have more options to them to be able to do more things in such a much more integrated type of fashion on set to a certain degree. So they're really kind of focusing so well on the practical stuff so much to kind of use that to a certain degree. Of course, they had an alien queen here, which also was partially CGI, but they did have two different sized models to work with depending on what sequences they were working on, stuff here and there. So they made a major work on the entire thing, just usurping what Stan Winston had done back on Aliens, just make it far more articulated, get a lot more motion into it, a lot more things they could do with it. So they just really did a good job on it, but certain things where you're kind of looking at the rampaging alien queen, where you're so used to how it was in Aliens, where like they're very restricted on how much movement they could give it. It's just kind of hard to kind of get used to it, kind of moving so easily and freely and fast. So kind of an interesting thing there in terms of the execution in that regard, but I definitely have problems with the Predators. How they look in this entire film just nothing looks right with them. You know, Ian White, who's portraying all the Predators on screen here, aside from a few minor points where they have like stand-ins and whatnot, but he was mainly portraying all of them on screen. He ended up being the Wolf Predator in the following AVP film, which everyone has major regards for his performance, what he did with the Wolf Predator, which was much more improved from what they did in this thing. So he can do the performance, but whether it's the direction or the designing of the costumes or something else like that, the Predators never feel quite right in this whole thing. One, they're kind of built up these very bulky frames, like the size of like an NFL linebacker or something like that. They don't look right. They don't move the same way as other Predators do. So it's like nothing fits in the cogs in regards to the portrayals in this film. Of course, there are much younger versions, so they don't stand up in battle quite as well. And of course, they have going to a situation that was kind of thrown off to a certain degree with all the people down there from WEYLAND sort of expedition kind of throwing a monkey wrench in the entire works here and stuff like that. But the entire thing is like the Predators just don't quite feel right. The portrayals, the body language is not there whatsoever. And like I said, they're too big and bulky and stuff like that, so they can't really have the same movements. I also have a problem where, like, it's just the fact you don't get any personality from this Scar Predator they have in the entire film, the main one that kind of lasts through the majority of the film. You don't get a sensibility of all the things that Kevin Peter Hall had done before. And of course, a lot of the other people later on, like Derek Mears and Dane DeLigro, have done with Predator performances to really give that sensibility of a real intelligent character here, fully formed on screen. It's just not here in terms of maybe it's just Anderson's direction. He just didn't put it into the entire film here to really get that sort of sensibility of the entire thing, to get that sort of intelligence of the character and the creature and whatnot kind of conveying through the emotions and stuff like that in the entire film. It just feels too much of like a blank slate of a character in that regard. So that kind of really affects how the story moves along and how effective it is when you got this entire thing where his other members of his entire party get slashed and taken out by the other aliens. And then you got the entire thing where he eventually teams up with Lex. And that's where I have the problem. When I saw this in the theater, I don't know if I laughed at the moment where they kind of teamed up, but I feel like I might have groaned or something like that because it just didn't feel right. Same about it felt, even watching it now, it's like when I watch them like kind of gear up and then kind of running off together side by side, it just feels kind of silly to me. There's something very much stripped away and very absent from the portrayal of the Predators here. So many those little character-based elements of the film just never reached to a full peak fruition here to really make it feel like it's an earned sensibility in the entire film. And then there's the look of the Predator. When it takes the helmet off and you see the actual face, man, it's not good. It just looks like an animatronic to me. It doesn't look like a fully organic being on screen that I always saw with the Stan Winston creations and some of the stuff like Predators and Prey and whatnot. This one just doesn't feel right. Even AVP Requiem, it still looks like a very good thing. When you actually see anything in that film, which you basically cannot see goddamn shit because they fucked things up in post-production, but it always felt like a living, breathing creature on screen. I never saw like someone in a suit. I saw an actual, fully fledged, organic thing, and this one just looks fake. It just doesn't look right. Or it's the coloring, or the way they photograph it, or anything else like that. This thing just looks completely off. I don't like the design of it. And I hate to say that about Studio 80i because they're very, very good at their jobs. They have a fantastic record over the entire careers. But yeah, the Predators are just very disappointing in this entire film, from the design of them to the performance, the direction, everything in the script. It's just not really working for me overall in the entire film. Thankfully, like I said, in AVP Requiem, despite a lot of things people have to say about that negatively, the Wolf Predator has been very well received, but anything like that. But xenomorphs all look good in this entire film. ADI's got that down pat. They've done 2 previous Alien films. They know exactly how to design them, how to work them. Woodruff knows how to do the performance very well. Everything's put together very, very well to represent them in very good ways. Like, they do have a few minor sequences where they're kind of going through the tunnels, and they kind of peek out here and there, and they kind of rush people here and there. It's like, comes out of the darkness. Like, they still manage to get those few minor creepy moments in the entire film. So they're very well represented. And, of course, there's the whole thing where they kind of, like, took liberties with the alien life cycle with the face hugger and the chest burster. Kind of like happens within like maybe an hour or something like that, when usually it's like maybe like a day or so. So there are a few criticisms here and there in terms of like kind of doing some things that kind of convenience the plot or whatnot here and there. But generally the xenomorphs are very well done. Unlike the Alien Queen, the whole thing does a very nice job on that. Of course, you get up the climax and whatnot. You get that buddy team up. They're kind of going off and battling the entire Alien Queen or whatnot on the Antarctic and stuff like that. So it's pretty well done. It's like nothing in the action department of the entire film really kind of energizes me to a great degree or whatnot. It's like it's all well done. It just doesn't tantalize me. It doesn't really kind of amp me up to a certain degree. So a lot of things in terms of like this film is like the script is very thin. Like a lot of people were saying at the time, it's like there's a lot of lacking substance and depth. When you look at all the peaks of these 2 franchises before, man, they could deliver some fantastic characters. Really just interesting stuff. I mean, everything really Scott did with the first film, grabbing that script and doing so many things with those actors to kind of make a very textured, tangible world to inhabit. Everything that was in Predator with Dutch and his team and whatnot really felt like they're very vibrant, fleshed out characters. You really get a sense about who they are, what the relationships are between them, what they're capable of, and how that influences the entire story, how the audience perceives the Predator through how good these guys actually are at their job. So a lot of things were very well laid out in terms of character, very memorable type of things, very vibrant, charismatic personalities. And here and there and everywhere, a lot of the other films, they just fleshed out certain characters here and there to really make them relatable, make them have a certain amount of substance to them. This one just really didn't work that much to really develop characters so much to really have you be attached to anyone when everyone's getting knocked off here and there and getting attacked by xenomorphs and stuff like that. So not a lot of good things in that regard. It's like everything is the fact that I think an AVP film would work better if it was set in a futuristic setting. You could do a lot more with it, a lot more science fiction ideas, and just have it divorced from like trying to be more of a prequel to the Alien films. Just make it a sequel to everything. You can make it a sequel to absolutely everything and not have to worry about fucking out continuity and mingling things up in that regard. I think it would be a much more exciting film if you had much more of a futuristic setting and a much more different type of environment instead of having to intertwine everything so much with all they have to do with backstories and whatnot, going back hundreds, thousands of years, stuff like that, saying this pyramid's been here since God knows whenever. It really starts with the screenplay. If it was a much stronger screenplay, I think Anderson could have done something more with it if he just wanted to make a deeper, more substantive screenplay that honored everything else in these franchises that came before it. So it really comes down to the screenplay just being kind of weak and limp and not having a lot of interesting things to really dig deep into to really get you more out of it. And it's got all these different problems, but still, you can kind of coast through it to a certain degree. It's not egregiously bad to me, but it's not great in any way. It's very much a limp, lackluster type of film, especially based on all that build-up over a decade, maybe a decade and a half of worth of build-up. A year after you got Freddy vs. Jason, which I loved on opening weekend, but the more I examined it, the more I felt like that thing was just a really badly executed, very missed opportunity, and such the wrong director, and so many other things with it just didn't come off well. A lot of people have a much more of an affinity towards it because they view it in less critical light. I've kind of flip-flopped. I loved Freddy vs. Jason on opening weekend, now I can't really stand it. AVP, I didn't like it at all on opening weekend. I was kind of really seething mad to a certain degree. Now I kind of don't mind it so much. I think it's okay. It's okay. When you've gone into it, seen it, you got your expectations in line, you go back and watch it later on. It's not terrible. It's not great. AVPR definitely has a lot of problems. It has some things that are improved upon from this one. It's much more gorier, maybe to a grotesque fashion, but definitely the Wolf Predator in AVP Requiem is very much a highlight, despite the fact it's covered in shadows the entire goddamn movie. But anything like that, so here and there, I hate to be kind of flimsy on that regard, but the film is kind of flimsy. It has certain qualities to it that are very good, but they're not enough. When we look back on like Event Horizon, Anderson had some really good things in that film. Did have some very well-developed characters with some fantastic actors on it and fantastic production design, an awesome cinematographer for it. So it really does still pull itself along very well. Still has some detriments, but I still think Event Horizon is way better than this film. The Mortal Kombat film is pretty nice. It's still kind of a fun type of romp to a certain degree, and it has some very great action sequences to it, a lot of good style to it. So I don't know what really happened on this one that made it kind of limp and lackluster. Like I said, kind of blasé to a certain degree. So I'd like to hear what you guys feel about the whole thing, because I did play the Super Nintendo game, which was kind of just a regular side-scrolling beat-em-up platform or whatnot. I thought it was okay, but certainly there's a lot better AVP games out there, and maybe not so much films. But I'd like to hear what you guys think about the entire thing. If you do prefer like the theatrical cut over the rated one, because you feel like the CGI blood is just kind of shit. But it does feel in maybe minor character tethers here and there, kind of connective tissue with characters and whatnot, but it's not much, especially since that's the version I watched for this review, and it really didn't impress me all that much in terms of character. So, in that regard. But guys, comments below, thumbs up if you enjoyed the video and stuff like that, and there's always a subscribe button to kind of keep expanding the channel here and get you guys updated on the whole thing. There's always that notification bell thing. If you want to hit that to kind of get updated every time I upload anything, so you don't lose it in your feeds or anything like that, there's that. Plus, there's the Super Thanks feature. You can contribute like any dollar amount you want to any video that you find exceptionally entertaining here. And of course, with the Patreon, you can get a little extra early access every month with a few extra bucks thrown our way to make sure we get support here and keep doing great things. So, kind of looking to get up to this one. I was kind of teasing doing it back when Prey was coming up on Hulu and stuff like that, but I didn't feel quite as strongly about it. But it's been kind of stewing in the head for long enough. I felt strong enough to kind of talk about it here and there. So, hope you guys enjoyed the video, and see you around soon. So guys, thanks much. Take care. Bye-bye.